with the new ban list upon us in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, what is going to be the best deck for you to climb with? Hello guys and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, we're taking a look at the top decks in order for climbing, specifically, with the new ban list in effect. Mostly, the hit is to Tenpai, as well as a few other decks are getting some buffs here or there, but yeah, for the most part, let's just go over over the decks. Yeah, I have 3 tiers and then Rogue and everything else. Mostly because of the fact that the ladder is best of 1 and it is less competitive. There's not like a set hierarchy in the metagame, and I think a lot of that, there are a lot more decks, more specifically, that are viable and are playable. Whereas if this were a Duelist Cup or a tournament style event, I think there are a lot fewer decks for that. So let's quickly hop into this. Starting off, for some reason, with Blackwing, which is bad. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I don't think it's very good. It dies to Max E, it dies to hand traps, it dies to no hand traps, it dies to all of the jank that currently people are playing because of Tenpai existing and therefore just, you know, absolutely FTKing you. So, yeah, dude, no. Same thing with Blue Eyes. This is not really a consideration. Next up, we have Branded. Branded, I'm going to have Branded in tier 3. I think it's okay. It's a solid deck, but it's not the best options available to you. And it really, for the most part, is just like an FTK style deck where it's like, cool, I'm going to give you this guy and you're no longer going to be able to special summon. Or like, maybe potentially I make a whole big board and don't die to Ash. However, even with that being said, if any sort of interaction does come their way, or if they just brick, which is actually fairly likely, the deck's not really all that playable. So, not great. Not terrible, but not great. Also, it doesn't really provide anything exceptional in the current, like, metagame for, like, matchup-wise. Like, nothing really just hard loses to Branded. Next up, we have Centurion. Centurion's also tier 3. It's fine. It's good. It's decent. But it's missing a lot of cards that really make it powerful. And, yeah, that's pretty much it. This deck is probably the most overrated, I think. I think it's fine, but I don't think it's all that exceptional at, like, climbing. I just think it's, like, a fun deck to play, which is great. Like, that's totally fine. If you enjoy playing any of these decks, like, that, go for it. It's way more fun, way more important to have fun than it is to actually, like, play the best deck, right? So, there you go. Next up, we have Chimera. Chimera's solid tier 2. I think there's a lot of things that can beat it, especially in a metagame where it has to go second more often. Honestly, actually, the more that I think about it, it's probably tier 3. I think you're just better off playing almost anything else. Not almost anything else. A lot of other decks, right? I think if it goes first, it has a very solid playable board, especially with the ability to, like, floodgate the opponent with a Dark Barrier statue, or floodgate the opponent with Diabels, or something along those lines. I think there's a lot of things that just, like, prevent the opponent from doing stuff, which can really help them. However, if it doesn't get to go first, like, playing into an established board is really difficult for it, because it's basically Guardian Chimera or bust, and if they can't beat, or if they can beat a Guardian Chimera, like, also it can just lose to itself sometimes, which is not great. Dark World is a joke. Even with Silva, it's a joke. Yeah, Voices is also, this isn't Voices, this is a Virtual World. Also not very good. I just realized I don't think Voices is on here. I'll have to fix that. But we'll get to that later. There's a lot of, like, not everything is on here. And if there is something that I'm missing, let me know down below where you would play something. So there is a Dino deck that did get top 100 in the Duelist Cup, but a lot of that, if you actually look at the deck list, is basically, hey, if I go first, I'm killing you. And if I go second, you got it. Which is a lot of decks, to be fair, in the Duelist Cup. But at the very least, I don't think that Dino is inherently, like, insane. However, even with that being said, I still think it's pretty good. I still think Dino has the capability of playing the game. However, similarly to, like, all of this, it also just kind of loses to itself a lot of times. So, not great. True Draco, as much as I want to put it in everything else, True Draco actually is a rogue tier option. I think it has the capability... Sorry. That's the Pendulum True Draco. That's not True Draco. That's a Pendulum monster. We're going to just refer to it as True Draco at this point, because there's like 4 Pendulum decks, and let's be honest, all Pendulum decks basically do the exact same thing. And if you're telling me that they don't, genuinely think about what the difference is between True Draco Pendulum, Endymion Pendulum, and Magician Pendulum. What is it that they do that's different from any of these other decks? And if you say spell counters, that doesn't count. Because guess what? The Endymion end board is basically the exact same as all of the rest of those. Endymion's like the only one that like even remotely is different. But like Valence is like this. Any of the other pendulum decks, it's basically just pendulum slop at this point. So pendulum is, I'm still going to put it in rogue. I actually don't think it's all that good. The only reason it had as much of a showing as it did is because it, again, pretty much just FTKs the opponent. It just prevents them from playing the game. And in a format where half of the time your opponent is going to give you going first when they win the coin flip, yeah, it's pretty nice to just be able to not play the game, especially against Tenpai. So yeah, that's it. That's it. As for True Draco, the actual deck that I want to talk about, True Draco genuinely is a solid option. It's simple, it's easy, it's concise, and it's pretty cheap. I think you need like maybe a few URs here or there, but like most of them are staples and then like the one masterpiece. True Draco is genuinely a very, very solid option for ranked. However, with that being said, it is extremely weak. It mostly loses to itself, and it just gets outgrinded by just about anything. So for the most part, while it isn't terrible, it's also not great. So I can't put it any higher than Rogue. Though I want to, I can't. Next up, we have Dragon Link. I think Dragon Link is heavily slept on in the current metagame, and just in general. While it does lose to Maxi, a lot of decks do, and for the most part, its combo is resilient and able to play through a lot of varying different interactions. It does not do well going second. However, I don't think it's that bad at going second. So yeah, for the most part, I think it's great. Again, in terms of a competitive environment, I don't think Dragon Link is great, but for climbing, I think it's fantastic. I think it's a great option. You're not really going to lose to just about, you're not going to randomly lose to yourself or randomly lose to like the coin flip or something like that. For the most part, you have options, and that's what makes it great. Life Twin is the worst version of Sprite. I will continue to say this, and I will say this until the people stop playing Life Twin. Life Twin is just, it's not good. In comparison to the myriad of other options that you have specifically with Sprite, it's not really all that worthwhile. That being said, I don't think it's bad. I think it's fine. It's just a little bit weaker. When you could be doing a lot more with a lot less, yeah, it's significantly better. That's pretty much it. Exosister is really bad right now. In theory, Exosister does good, but in reality, it doesn't. Because if you've actually read any of the effects of the Exosisters, they are so incredibly simple to beat. Like an Imperm here, a Ash Blossom there, a Kaiju here. Like obviously not everyone's playing Kaijus right now, but like you get the point. Like there are so many easy ways to basically invalidate the entire strat. I don't even want to put it in Rogue. I just don't think you should be playing it. I'd play something else. However, again, if you enjoy the deck, you do you, boo. Next up, we have probably the biggest winner of the most recent ban list. Fire King Snake Eye is still insanely good. A little bit slept on, just a little bit. I also realized Yubel is not on here. I'm gonna fix that. All right, cool. Next up, Mpen. More specifically, coming back to 3. Flunder. I think it has the potential to be good again. Mostly due to the fact that being able to actually see Mpen multiple times means that the end board is a lot more resilient, and you're a lot more likely to actually be able to win the game off of your Flunder plays, which means now actually going first matters a lot more for this deck, whereas previously you could pretty much play through the board just due to the fact that like Mpen didn't get multiple searches, right? Or like interacting with one of the Mpens basically shuts down the entire board. But now with 2, it basically forces the opponent to have either like multiple imperms or basically some sort of interaction that either entirely shuts down your deck or more specifically can beat a 2 Mpen board. So there's that. I think it's very strong. Honestly, I think that Flunder was never really that bad. It mostly was just kind of like losing to itself with consistency, but it's always kind of been that. So there's that. I'm going to put it a little bit lower, but I do think it is a tier 3. I think it's fairly strong. Gimmick Puppet, I actually think just drops significantly. Look, if your opponent is not specifically allowing you to go first, this deck doesn't go second, like at all. There is no head. There is no thought. There is no head empty. There is no cognition, brain. Just like me, apparently. Dear Lanta, I can't speak. Yeah, Gimmick Puppet pretty much doesn't do anything going second. However, going first, obviously it can OTK, but with the loss of Tenpai being as dominant as it is, or as it was, you are a lot less likely to have to play a deck that is solely designed to go first, and you will have to deal with a lot more hand traps, which I think matters significantly more, even though, like, yes, Gimmick Puppet can turn off the hand traps with the field spell. You're not always going to see the field spell. Potentially there's, you know, imperm or something along those lines that the field spell doesn't care about, right? Nibiru even can prevent you from dying because your opponent summons a whole bunch and then they give a guy to you and then you go and Nibiru it because then it doesn't die. So yeah, I just think this is more likely to be robbed of its slot in the metagame. Hero's pretty solid right now. It always is. It's like the definition of rogue. Moving on. Okay, so I have we're not going to talk about you. We're going to talk about you. Magematic is still pretty solid. However, again, Magematic is one of the decks that was benefited, I think, the most by having such a go first centric metagame, where being able to go first just kind of wins you the game and you're more likely to go first. So because of that, I do think that Magematic loses quite a bit. However, even with that being said, it still had the ability to play a bunch of hand traps and non-engine. So for the most part, it's not really losing a whole lot, and I still think it's insanely dominant. Mostly, well, not dominant, insanely good, mostly due to the fact that Circular still exists and it's able to close out games pretty effectively. That being said, I don't think it's insane. I think it's just a good deck. Infernoid loses to itself probably the most. I don't want to talk about Infernoid. Infernoid's so bad. Cira is like rogue if we're just playing Cira. The engine of like Fenris and Unicorn should be played in just about any deck, or at least can be played in just about any deck. So for the most part, I'm not really like, I don't think the Cira cards are bad. It's more so Cira as a strategy where your whole plan is to play Cira cards is just not very good right now. Mostly due to the fact that the Cira cards are just like so heavily limited, right? Like all of the cards that you want to see just are limited, right? 1 Fenris, 2 Unicorn, 1 field spell. Uh-oh. And then on top of that, yeah, well, basically, because of that, you end up losing to yourself, even prior to the limitations, the deck kind of lost to itself as well, mostly due to, like, not seeing a Unicorn or a Fenris or something like that. So, yeah, for the most part, not much has changed, except for it got more inconsistent. Labyrinth, I think, is actually a tier 1 deck, in the sense of being able to climb, mostly due to the fact that, yeah, Labyrinth is just good. I don't really have anything else to say. I think it's a good deck. I think, yeah, especially the biggest problem was that Tenpai forced Labyrinth to not be able to play around the rest of the metagame, and Tenpai was able to play just so many board breakers that they basically just activated a lightning storm or something like that and then killed you. And if you let any one thing through, you died, right? So it's not something where it's like, oh cool, I can play this like long drawn out game and eventually out advantage my opponent. It's like, no, you just die. But now, without the Tenpai and with simultaneous equation cannon still being around, yeah, you're a lot more likely to actually be able to win the game there. So there you go. Next up we have Lightsworn, which is mostly going to be played with Tyr, and even with that being said, I just don't think it's very good. Most of the time, the Lightsworn variant is just the FTK variant, which, I don't think is all that great right now. It's okay, but, like, it's not nearly as good. Madolche, hate to break it to you, it's not very good. Mana DM is fine. I'm also going to talk about Infern Noble at this point. They basically do the same thing, which is basically big wombo combo, similar to, like, Pendulum shenanigans. But they do, like, this big wombo combo and end on a big unbreakable board. However, with the fact that less people are going to be allowing you to go first, you're a lot less likely to actually be able to play going first, and playing into an established board with that is very susceptible, right? Both Mana and Infern Noble are very susceptible to playing into an established board, so yeah, it's not great, but going first is still very strong, and they can still make a very, very powerful board. Melodious is probably the most heavily slept on deck, I think, genuinely, mostly due to the fact that as an engine, it is extremely powerful. We saw it in Pendulum, mostly, as an engine in Pendulum. However, even with that being said, Melodious has, well, first of all, Melodious also got a boost with the Herald of Orange Light, allowing you to play basically more copies of that, which is one of the best negates in the game. So, very powerful there. On top of that, it also gives you access to a very difficult and sticky end board to deal with off of singular cards, which means if a single card resolves, you're able to just kind of like win the game, right? And then on top of that, you're also able to play a whole bunch of just solid hand traps in general. So overall, I do think that it's basically just like Math-Mech, but weaker. That's pretty much what it is. Where it's like, cool, if they make their end board, not a lot of decks are going to be able to beat that, right? Especially if, like, they threw a hand trap at it or something like that, and it just, like, played through it. So, yeah, for the most part, I think it's maybe the most underrated. Maybe. Might be another deck on this list. Memento, I put that way too high. Memento is, like, really bad right now. It's not terrible. I think it's still playable, but I do think that there are a lot of weaknesses to it, and it's not really worth going over. Tenpais! Still tier. Look, as much as I've been talking about Tenpai taking kind of a backseat, it's still going to be there. One copy of Chandra and one copy of the Field Spell does a deck still make. Yes. Pretty much what I'm trying to say is, like, Tenpai losing consistency matters a lot, but they can still just kill you. They can still just OTK you through whatever you've done, because they could just play more interactions in those slots, or they could potentially play like a Pot of Desires or something along those lines, right? And just kind of like high roll and hope and pray that they just draw the out, because they're pretty much already doing that. So while yes, the consistency does go down, and I don't think it's as good, it's still good. It's still a competent deck. It's still playable. It's not going to go away. While it is worse, it's still something to consider. So, I don't think it's the best deck, not by a long shot, but I do think that it is something to look out for. Next up, we have Tearlament. Tearlament is a solid... I'm going to put it in tier 2. I think it kind of loses a lot by the Tenpai not existing. Basically, allowing you to go first more often is great for tier. Obviously, Tyr's not going to be able to do that more often. So there you go. And next up, we have White Forest. White Forest, I think, is also pretty heavily slept on, but I don't think it's as good. I think it's better than Centurion. But not by a lot. I think you're better off playing... if you're going to play Centurion, you're better off playing it with the White Forest cards. I think the White Forest cards just allow you to make an end board that's insanely powerful. Whereas the Centurion cards don't really do that, but allow you to kind of grind a bit more. So, there's that. And I think just establishing a better end board is kind of better. Next up, we have Sprite. Sprite's in tier 2. Sprite's insane. Sprite is really, 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 really heavily underrated, and I think it is genuinely one of the best decks in the current format. If not, yeah, let's do that. Yeah, I think Sprite's crazy. Anyway, moving on. Sky Striker got a card back, and it really doesn't matter. It's still Rogue. Why did I put that so high? It's still Rogue. The problem with Sky Striker is that it's just like not strong enough. Either you play it as a terrible going first control deck, which again just doesn't work right now, or you play it as a board breaker deck going second. But because everyone is still kind of like playing this I'm going to go first and just kill you kind of idea, and I don't think people are going to immediately switch from that. It's just not all that great. And even if they were to switch from that and like start playing a more like half and half style deck where it's like, oh, I go first half of the time and I go second half of the time, I still think Sky Striker's not really going to be able to push through the boards effectively enough to still win games consistently, right? Sure, it can, right? But it's not always going to be able to. So it's solid, but not insane. Next up, we have Yugioh. Yugioh is a solid deck, and while it did kind of lose some things here or there, I think it is just so easily a tier 1 deck. Unless we get something like Fiendsmith or Varudras. I don't think it's overtaking Fire King Snake Eye. I think, while it is very strong, I think Fire King overall is stronger. And then we have Voiceless Voice. Voiceless Voice, honestly, is probably the best deck. It's just solid. It's just a solid deck. I know in the current metagame, it's like really good because of Tenpai, and it's great matchup into Tenpai. But the thing is, I genuinely think it is just a very simplistic deck to play, which does help for climbing, obviously. But I genuinely think that it is a very difficult board to break, and is extremely strong because of that. I could be coping, but that's fine, because it's my tier list. And genuinely speaking, I do think Voices is probably the best deck going into the current metagame. Yeah, I think it's just as inconsistent as these other ones. It makes just as consistent of a board, and is still very strong, but I think one of the things that benefits it is the fact that it doesn't play into Max C as much as these two. Right? I'm going to move Lab down. Lab isn't in the same tier as these three. But yeah, that's pretty much it. There you go. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy. If you did, I like it very much. So appreciate it. And remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.